Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes in life, you have to stop waiting for the perfect moment and start creating it. You've been praying, you've been planning, you've been hoping, but now it's time to make a move, because the truth is God can't bless a step you never take. You've been standing at the edge of destiny, paralyzed by fear, waiting for a sign that it's safe to walk. But faith was never about safety. It was about movement. It's about trusting that even if you take one trembling step, God will meet you right there in motion. Faith requires movement. God can't bless a step you never take. You can pray all day, you can fast, you can dream, you can talk about it, but until you take that step, until you decide to move, faith remains an idea instead of a reality. God didn't design faith to be comfortable. He designed it to be active. When you take a step, even a trembling one, that's when heaven begins to respond. Faith is not waiting for the fear to leave. It's moving while the fear is still whispering in your ear. You've been waiting for a moment that feels safe, a moment when the path is clear, when all the answers line up, but faith has never operated in clarity. It has always thrived in uncertainty. When God gives you a vision, He doesn't hand you the blueprint. He hands you a promise and expects you to walk toward it. The step you take may not make sense, but that's what makes it faith. You can't say you trust God and refuse to move when He says go. The beauty of faith is that it's not logical, it's spiritual. It's believing that God has already gone before you, even when you can't see the way. It's trusting that your obedience is powerful enough to unlock doors that hesitation could never open. So many of us are standing on the edge of something great, but fear has convinced us to stay still. We say we're waiting on God, but in truth, God is waiting on us. He's waiting for movement, for that one step that shows Him we're ready to partner with His plan. The Israelites didn't see the Red Sea part until Moses moved. Peter didn't walk on water until he stepped out of the boat. The woman with the issue of blood didn't get healed until she reached for his garment. The miracle didn't happen in their thoughts. It happened in their movement. Faith requires participation. You can't keep sitting in the same place asking for breakthrough if you're not willing to move toward it. God will give you the vision, but you have to give Him the motion. He doesn't bless comfort. He blesses courage, and sometimes that means moving with shaky hands, a racing heart, and tears in your eyes. Because faith doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you trust God more than you trust your fear. Maybe you've been praying for a new season, but you're still clinging to old habits, old environments, old versions of yourself. Faith means leaving behind what's familiar to step into what's divine. Abraham had to leave his home before he ever knew where God was taking him. He didn't get the map. He just got the word, go. That's what faith looks like. Trusting the voice of God more than the logic of your surroundings. You've been talking about what God told you to do for too long. You've been planning it, discussing it, waiting for the perfect conditions. But can I tell you, there will never be a perfect time to move. There will only be now, because when God says move, it's not about comfort, it's about obedience. Every delay born from fear is disobedience disguised as wisdom. God doesn't need you to have it all figured out. He needs you to move. To trust that the moment your foot hits the ground, He'll provide the stability. Some of you are praying for God to open a door, but the door won't open until you walk toward it. It doesn't open automatically. It opens through obedience. You're waiting for confirmation, but sometimes confirmation comes after the step, not before. When you move, you show heaven that you believe what God said, even when everything around you looks opposite. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains. That's the kind of faith that draws heaven's attention. There's a difference between waiting in faith and waiting in fear. Waiting in faith means you're preparing, positioning, expecting. Waiting in fear means you're avoiding, doubting, and hesitating. You know what God told you, but fear keeps replaying what could go wrong. Faith says, even if it doesn't go the way I expect, I'll still go. Because you understand that movement in obedience is never wasted. Even if it doesn't look like victory right away, every step of faith is a seed that God honors. We love to say walk by faith, not by sight, but when it's time to walk, most of us freeze. Because faith doesn't always look like success. Sometimes it looks like uncertainty. Sometimes it looks like leaving something behind that you loved. Sometimes it looks like stepping into something that makes no sense to anyone else. But faith isn't about pleasing people. It's about pleasing God. It's about saying, Lord, I don't know what's next, but I know you're with me, and that's enough. Faith requires risk, and risk requires trust. You can't have one without the other. If you're waiting to feel ready, you'll never move. Faith doesn't wait for readiness. It builds it as you go. Every act of obedience strengthens your faith for the next one. You might not see the whole staircase, but faith asks you to take the first step and trust that the rest will appear. God isn't asking for perfection. He's asking for participation. Think about how many blessings have been delayed because of hesitation. Think about how many opportunities have passed because fear had a louder voice than faith. Fear will always tell you to stay still, to play it safe, to wait until everything feels certain. But faith whispers, go now. And when you dare to trust God beyond your comfort, that's when you start to see the miraculous unfold. Because movement activates miracles. The enemy doesn't have to destroy you. He just has to keep you still. He knows that as long as you don't move, as long as you stay afraid to step, your faith never has the chance to grow. But the moment you move, the moment you take that first step, everything changes. Your mindset shifts, your confidence grows, your connection to God deepens. You realize that the same God who called you is the same God who will sustain you. When you move in faith, you give God something to work with. He can multiply what's moving. The loaves and fish didn't multiply in the disciples' hands until they started giving them out. The oil didn't flow for the widow until she started pouring it. Miracles happen in motion. You can't see overflow until you start to pour. You can't experience breakthrough until you start to move. You've got to stop asking God to do for you what He's asking to do through you. You're the vessel He wants to use, the one He's equipped for this very moment. But you have to trust Him enough to step out. You may not feel qualified. You may not feel ready, but faith doesn't wait for qualifications. It moves on conviction. If God placed it in your heart, He's already equipped you to handle it. You've been praying for a new beginning, and God is saying, start walking. You've been asking for confirmation, and He's saying, I already gave you my word. You've been asking for open doors, and He's saying, turn the handle. The power isn't in the plan, it's in the move. Heaven responds to faith in action, not faith in words. Every great move of God begins with a step of faith, a step of trust, a step of obedience. That's how destinies are unlocked. You can't talk your way into purpose. You have to walk your way into it. The moment you move, something in the spiritual realm shifts. Angels align, opportunities emerge, and strength you didn't know you had begins to rise inside of you. Faith doesn't promise that the road will be easy. It promises that God will be with you on it. He will strengthen your hands when they tremble, steady your feet when they falter, and guide your heart when it feels lost. You might stumble, but even your stumble can still move you forward. Because in the kingdom of God, movement, no matter how messy, still counts as progress. So keep moving, even if you don't know how it's all going to work out, even if you don't see the results yet, even if everything in you says to stay still. Faith is not about what you see, it's about what you know. You know that God is faithful. You know that He keeps His promises. You know that He didn't bring you this far to leave you standing still. There's a version of you waiting on the other side of your obedience, a stronger, wiser, freer version. But you'll never meet her until you move. You'll never see what God has prepared if you stay in the safety of what's familiar. It's time to move, not because you have it all figured out, but because you believe that the one who called you is already on the other side, waiting to catch you when you leap. Faith requires movement because miracles live in motion. Comfort zones are cages disguised as safety. They feel warm, they feel predictable, and they give the illusion of peace. But what they're really doing is trapping your potential. The longer you stay in them, the more you start to believe that this is where you belong. You convince yourself that you're protecting your peace, when in reality, you're protecting your fear. Comfort zones whisper lies. They tell you that the risk is too big, the dream is too far, and that failure would break you. But it's not failure that breaks you. It's staying stuck in a life that doesn't stretch you, in a space that doesn't challenge you to grow. Comfort zones feel like safety because they keep you in control. You know what to expect. You know the routine, you know the outcome. But growth and control can't live in the same room. The moment you decide to grow, you must release your grip on certainty. You must step into the unknown and trust that what's unfamiliar isn't dangerous, it's divine. You can't pray for elevation and stay anchored to what's comfortable. You can't ask God to do a new thing while holding on to old habits. Every great transformation begins with discomfort, because discomfort is the signal that you're moving toward destiny. God will never let you get too comfortable in a place that wasn't meant to hold your calling. That's why the job starts feeling heavy. That's why the relationship starts feeling tight. That's why the same routines that once brought you joy now feel empty. It's not that you failed, it's that you've outgrown that space. Growth will always make comfort feel like confinement. When God is calling you higher, He will start shaking everything around you that was built for who you used to be. You were never meant to live small just because small feels safe. Safety is not the same as purpose. You can be safe and still miserable, protected but unfulfilled. The place where you feel most secure can also be the place where your potential goes to sleep. Comfort zones don't announce their danger because they don't destroy you suddenly. They destroy you silently. One day you look up and years have passed and you realize you've been surviving instead of living. Stepping out of your comfort zone means stepping into trust. It means believing that if God brought you this far, He didn't bring you here to stay still. It means knowing that there is more for you, even if you can't see it yet. It means accepting that growth feels lonely sometimes, that elevation requires separation, that not everyone can go with you where you're going. Sometimes the discomfort you feel isn't punishment, it's preparation. God is stretching you, shaping you, building new strength in you for the next season. Comfort zones convince you to settle. They whisper, "This is enough. Don't reach higher. Don't ask for more." But the voice of faith says, there's more in you. There's more to experience, more to create, more to become. You can't hear that voice clearly when you're surrounded by comfort, because comfort keeps you busy maintaining what you have instead of pursuing what's ahead. Comfort will make you choose average over anointing, survival over success, fear over faith. Every dream demands discomfort. Every calling comes with a challenge. If you keep trying to stay comfortable, you'll miss the lessons that can only come through stretching. Look at every story of transformation. Nobody stayed comfortable and fulfilled their purpose. Moses had to leave the palace. Ruth had to leave her homeland. Esther had to risk her position. They all had to trade comfort for calling, because calling never comes to those who refuse to move. When you cling to comfort, you build walls around your potential. You start to believe that what you have now is all you're capable of. But the truth is, God planted something inside you that can only bloom when it's stretched. The soil of safety is too shallow for the roots of destiny. You've got to break through that soil if you ever want to see the fullness of what's inside you. The longer you stay still, the harder it becomes to move. Fear grows in the absence of motion. The moment you start to take even a small step out of your comfort zone, that fear begins to lose power. There's a reason why you feel restless even when things are fine. That's not dissatisfaction. It's divine discomfort. It's the Spirit reminding you that fine isn't enough when you were created for fullness. You can't stay where it's easy and expect to experience where it's extraordinary. Growth is always on the other side of, I don't know if I can do this. That's where faith lives. That's where miracles happen. You don't have to leap out of your comfort zone all at once. Sometimes it starts with small steps, saying yes to the opportunity you feel unqualified for, setting a boundary that scares you, having a conversation that challenges you. Every step away from comfort is a step closer to courage. Every time you choose discomfort for the sake of purpose, heaven applauds, because comfort zones are where faith dies, but discomfort is where destiny begins. The hardest part of leaving comfort is letting go of control. You can't predict what's next, and that uncertainty can feel terrifying, but that's where trust comes in. Trust says, even if I can't see the next chapter, I believe the author has already written it for my good. You won't always feel brave when you take that step. Most times you'll feel afraid. But courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move through it. You can't wait for courage to come. You create it by acting in faith. Sometimes God will close doors you're too afraid to shut yourself. He'll remove people, end seasons, shake foundations, not to hurt you, but to push you out of the comfort that's been holding you captive. Because He knows if He doesn't disturb it, you'll never leave it. And He loves you too much to let you live below your potential. Every storm, every disappointment, every uncomfortable moment is God's way of saying, there's more for you. Move. The danger of staying comfortable is that it tricks you into thinking time isn't moving. You think you have forever to step into purpose, but every moment spent in comfort is a moment lost in calling. One day you'll realize that the thing you feared wasn't failure, it was growth. You were never afraid of falling, you were afraid of flying, you were afraid of discovering what you were truly capable of. Because once you taste what's beyond comfort, you can never go back to average again. You owe it to yourself to leave the cage. You owe it to your future, your calling, your purpose. There's a life waiting for you outside of what's safe, a life filled with meaning, fulfillment, and growth. The moment you step out, everything shifts, new doors appear, new strength rises, new opportunities unfold. Because God never designed you to stay where it's comfortable. He designed you to evolve, to expand, to keep moving forward no matter how unfamiliar it feels. You have to decide today that safety is no longer your standard. Purpose is, growth is, faith is. Don't let the fear of discomfort keep you from becoming everything God intended. Because while comfort may feel like protection, it's actually limitation. And you were created for so much more than that. The world doesn't need another person hiding behind fear. It needs someone willing to walk through it, to show that freedom begins where comfort ends. Progress starts when you stop waiting for perfect timing. You've been telling yourself you'll begin when things calm down, when you have more money, more confidence, more clarity. But the truth is, there will never be a perfect time. Life doesn't wait for your schedule to align. Progress happens when you decide that now is enough, that what you have is enough, and that who you are right now is enough to begin. Waiting for perfection is just fear dressed up as patience. It's the mind's way of protecting you from failure. But in doing so, it also protects you from growth. We convince ourselves that the timing has to feel right before we take the first step, but the right time rarely feels right. It often feels uncertain, uncomfortable, and inconvenient. Yet that's exactly how you know it's time to move. God doesn't always call you when it's convenient. He calls you when it's purposeful. Perfect timing is a myth because progress is built in the mess. The breakthrough you're waiting for is hidden inside the imperfect steps you're afraid to take. Every great story begins with someone who started before they were ready. They didn't wait until they had every resource, every connection, or every answer. They stepped out with faith, not certainty. They decided that movement was more important than mastery. Because progress is not about doing it perfectly. It's about doing it anyway. You grow into readiness. You don't wait for it. The strength you need will show up along the way, not before you start. Waiting for perfect timing keeps you trapped in analysis. You replay every possible scenario, every what if, until you talk yourself out of action. You end up rehearsing potential failure instead of building potential success. But perfection doesn't protect you. It paralyzes you. The longer you wait, the heavier fear becomes. You start doubting yourself, questioning your worth, convincing yourself that maybe this dream wasn't meant for you. But progress only belongs to those who dare to begin, even when beginning feels uncertain. Sometimes, waiting for the perfect time is just a way of avoiding responsibility. Because starting means committing. It means facing your doubts, risking your pride, confronting your weaknesses. And that's uncomfortable. But nothing changes until you confront the parts of yourself that keep making excuses. You don't have to have it all together. You just have to take one small, imperfect step. Because it's not the grand gesture that creates transformation. It's the consistent movement that builds momentum. When you look back, you'll realize that all the moments that mattered most didn't come when you were ready. They came when you were desperate enough to move. When you were tired of being stuck, tired of waiting, tired of believing that something magical would change without your effort. That's when true progress begins, when you decide that waiting is no longer an option. God doesn't need your perfection. He needs your participation. He can't steer what's standing still. You've been praying for open doors, but doors open when you walk toward them. You've been asking for signs, but sometimes the sign is the discomfort you feel while waiting. It's God nudging you, whispering, "Goo." Because if you wait until you feel completely ready, you'll spend your life watching opportunities pass by. Ready isn't a feeling, it's a choice. You choose to move despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, despite the lack of clarity. That's what faith looks like in action. Progress isn't always visible. Sometimes you won't see the results immediately, and that can be discouraging. But growth often happens underground, in the unseen places. Seeds don't sprout the moment they're planted. They develop roots first. Your progress may not be public yet, but that doesn't mean it's not real. Every decision, every act of obedience, every small step is shifting something in your life. The timing may not look perfect, but it's preparing you perfectly. You've got to stop waiting for a sign that feels safe. There's no safety in stagnation. Waiting for the perfect time often feels like wisdom, but sometimes it's disobedience in disguise. Because when God calls you to move, that is the perfect time. It doesn't matter what your bank account looks like, what your friends think, or whether everything is lined up. If he said go, go. He knows how to align what you can't. He knows how to meet you in the middle of motion. Progress is messy. It's full of mistakes, redirections, and lessons you never asked for. But those moments are where growth is born. Perfection keeps you polished, but stagnant progress keeps you moving and learning. You'll trip, you'll question yourself. But that's how you build strength. Every stumble is still movement forward because it's proof you're trying. You're doing what most people are too afraid to do. You're starting. There's a beauty in imperfect beginnings. You learn more in the doing than you ever could in the waiting. You learn resilience, adaptability, and humility. You learn that every wrong step still leads you closer to the right path, because progress isn't about getting everything right. It's about refusing to give up. The ones who win aren't always the most talented or the most prepared. They're the ones who showed up even when it was uncomfortable, even when the timing wasn't ideal. Perfect timing is the enemy of divine timing. Divine timing often looks messy. It pulls you out of your comfort zone, challenges your faith, and forces you to grow faster than you planned. But it's exactly where God does his best work. When you move before you feel ready, you make room for him to show up in your weakness. That's when you learn that his strength is made perfect in your imperfection. You can't control timing, but you can control obedience. Every time you act in obedience, even in uncertainty, you align yourself with progress. Waiting doesn't make you more qualified, moving does. Because the lessons you need can only be learned in motion. Faith isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about walking through it knowing that God walks with you. You might think you need more time, but time isn't what you need. You need courage. You need belief. You need to stop letting fear dictate your timeline. You've been equipped for this moment right now. You don't need to know every step. You just need to take the next one. Because every next step creates the momentum that carries you into your purpose. Progress doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. Be here right now in this moment, doing what you can with what you have. Stop waiting for the ideal circumstance, because the ideal circumstance is built through action, not anticipation. You've already spent enough time preparing. Now it's time to perform. Enough time dreaming. Now it's time to do. You'll never find perfect timing because perfect timing doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is your willingness to start where you are with what you have and trust that God will meet you along the way. That's how progress is born, not from perfect plans, but from imperfect courage that refuses to quit. Your obedience to move activates God's purpose in your life. You can pray all you want. You can dream all you want. You can talk about what God promised. But until you obey, until you take that step of faith, you'll keep standing at the edge of potential without ever walking into purpose. God's promises are true, but they're activated through movement. The miracle isn't just in the promise, it's in the obedience that follows it. When you move, heaven moves. When you act, the atmosphere shifts. God doesn't bless hesitation. He blesses obedience. So many people are waiting on God, but what if God is waiting on you, waiting for you to take the step he's been whispering in your heart, waiting for you to stop overthinking what he's already confirmed, waiting for you to trust that his instruction is enough, even when you can't see the outcome. The longer you delay obedience, the longer you delay destiny. You've been praying for clarity, but sometimes clarity comes only after obedience. You don't get the full picture first because faith doesn't operate in full visibility. It operates in trust. Obedience requires surrender. It requires you to lay down your desire to control, to know, to understand everything before you move. God often calls you to obey when it doesn't make sense because he wants you to depend on his direction, not your understanding. When Abraham was told to leave his homeland, he didn't get a map, he got a word. When Noah was told to build an ark, it had never rained. When Peter was told to cast his net again, he just failed all night. But every time they obeyed, something supernatural happened. Obedience unlocks outcomes that logic could never achieve. We love the idea of God's purpose, but purpose always demands obedience. You can't walk in divine calling and still do things your own way. Obedience is the bridge between where you are and where God wants to take you. You can talk about faith all day, but if your actions don't align with what you believe, faith becomes stagnant. Real faith doesn't just believe, it responds. When God tells you to move, and you obey even when it's uncomfortable, you're telling heaven, I trust you more than I trust myself. That's when doors open that no man can shut. Obedience doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with silence, with confusion, with loss. Sometimes it requires walking away from things that feel safe or people who don't understand your calling. But obedience isn't about understanding. It's about trusting that God's plan is greater than your comfort. Every act of obedience is a seed, and though you may not see the fruit right away, heaven is already watering it. You're not losing by obeying, you're investing in a future that your current self can't yet see. There are moments when obedience will cost you something. It will cost you your pride, your comfort, your control, sometimes even your circle. But what you gain in exchange, peace, purpose, and divine favor, will always outweigh what you lose. God uses obedience to shape your character. It's not just about the outcome, it's about who you become in the process. Every yes strengthens your faith, every step builds your endurance, and every act of surrender deepens your relationship with Him. Some of you have been wondering why you feel stuck, why things don't seem to shift even though you've been praying. But obedience is often the missing piece. You've asked for direction, but God's already given it. You just haven't acted on it yet. You're waiting for another sign, but your obedience is the sign heaven is waiting for. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. You can't ask for breakthrough while resisting the very instruction that leads to it. Obedience will always test your faith before it rewards it. God will ask you to do something that challenges your logic, something that makes you uncomfortable, something that seems impossible. Not because He wants to confuse you, but because He wants to grow you. He's preparing you for greater, but greater always begins with surrender. You can't carry old habits, old fears, and old mindsets into new seasons. Obedience is what separates those who talk about purpose from those who walk in it. It's not enough to believe that God can do it. You have to believe that He can do it through you. Obedience is faith in motion. It's your way of saying, God, I may not have all the answers, but I'll still go. That kind of trust catches heaven's attention. When you obey, you align yourself with divine timing. You start to see favor follow you, not because you forced it, but because obedience positioned you for it. You don't have to chase opportunities when obedience makes you magnetic to purpose. Sometimes God's instruction will come at the most inconvenient time. He'll ask you to give when you feel empty, to love when you feel broken, to speak when you feel silent. Because obedience isn't about convenience, it's about conviction. When you move according to His word instead of your feelings, you give Him permission to show His power through your weakness. That's when you realize that obedience isn't a burden, it's a weapon. It tears down strongholds, breaks cycles, and opens spiritual doors. Your obedience also carries generational weight. The choices you make today don't just affect you, they affect everyone connected to your lineage. When you obey God, you break patterns your family couldn't. You set new standards for your children, your community, and everyone watching your journey. You might not see the full impact now, but obedience echoes through generations. Your yes today could be the reason someone else finds freedom tomorrow. Obedience doesn't require perfection, it requires willingness. God isn't looking for flawless people, He's looking for surrendered ones. The moment you say, yes, Lord, even in fear, even in uncertainty, you've already positioned yourself for purpose. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to trust that God's hand is guiding every step. The path of obedience may be narrow, but it's filled with peace. Even when you can't see where it leads, you can rest knowing that it always leads closer to Him. There's a level of blessing that only obedience can unlock. You can't strategize your way into it. You can't manipulate your way into it. You have to obey your way into it because obedience releases favor. It's the key that opens the unseen. When you obey, even in the smallest things, you align your spirit with heaven's rhythm. You stop striving and start flowing. Things that once felt impossible begin to happen naturally because obedience invites divine alignment. Sometimes obedience will look like letting go of people, of opportunities, of timing you thought was right. And that hurts, but obedience also brings peace where understanding can't. It's the quiet knowing that even though you don't have the full picture, you're walking with the one who does. The steps of obedience may not always be glamorous, but they're always glorious in purpose. Every small act of faith is building something eternal, something far greater than what you can see. God doesn't call you to obey because He wants control. He calls you to obey because He knows what's ahead. He sees the traps, the distractions, the counterfeit blessings that look good but lead to disappointment. When you obey His instruction, you avoid the pain that disobedience creates. What looks like sacrifice now will later reveal itself as protection. God's commands are not restrictions, they're directions to destiny. Your obedience might confuse people. They might question your choices, misunderstand your decisions, or doubt your vision. But that's okay because obedience was never meant to make sense to everyone. It's between you and God. He doesn't require the approval of others to validate what he told you. The very people who don't understand your obedience now may one day be blessed because of it. So move even when it's lonely, because obedience sometimes requires isolation before elevation. Obedience isn't just about big, dramatic decisions. It's built in the small, daily ones. It's in how you speak, how you forgive, how you love, how you show up when no one's watching. Every small act of obedience compounds into destiny. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay consistent in the quiet. Because what you do privately in obedience, God will reward publicly in due time. If you've been hesitant to move, if you've been afraid that obedience might cost too much, remember this: disobedience costs far more. The peace you lose, the time you waste, the doors that close, they all come from hesitation. But when you obey, you align with divine acceleration. What would have taken years can happen in moments. That's the power of obedience. It multiplies what surrender releases. You don't need to know how it's all going to work out. You just need to move. Because the moment you do, heaven activates what's been waiting for your yes. God's purpose isn't waiting for your perfection. It's waiting for your obedience. And when you finally step out, when you finally trust him enough to take that leap, everything changes, not because you forced it, but because your obedience made room for his power to move through you.